Two new head coaching hires went down on Thursday. We talk about them both, headed to the NFC South on this episode of Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into your Friday episode of Locked On NFL, your daily podcast covering the National Football League, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On NFL your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. I'm David Harrison at DHarrison82 on Twitter, host of Locked On Commanders. He's Tony Wiggins on Twitter at Shot Talking Wig. That's two G's on the end of that. Both of us credentialed members of the media covering the Commanders and the Jaguars. Tony's also the host of Locked On Jags. I should not forget to mention that. Locked On NFL is here for you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, we appreciate the everydayers for your continued support for this network and all of the programming. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers, you get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed whenever you place a $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. On today's episode, we are going to preview and predict the AFC and NFC Championships. We're going to tell you who's going to the Super Bowl after this weekend, Wig. But first, we got to tell you who's arriving before we tell you where people are going. We've got two new head coaching hires in the National Football League, in the NFC South specifically. One of them actually breaking literally minutes before we sat down to record this episode. So good timing, Atlanta Falcons. We'll get to you in a second, but we're going to start, Wig, with Dave Canales, now the former Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator, headed to the Carolina Panthers. First reported that I saw anyway by Ian Rappaport of NFL Network. No details on length of deal or anything like that. That's for later on. But Wig, the biggest thing is he's joining general manager Dan Morgan. And of course, he and Morgan spent 8 years together in Seattle from 2010 to 2017. What do you think of Dave Canales going to Carolina?
I like it. It's an alarming trend though that's being set, and that is we really don't allow guys to really get into their role and be there for a long time and start cooking before we make them a supervisor of all supervisors. So if anything, that bothers me a little bit that everybody wants to catch the next hot guy. Something that Louis Riddick said early on social media was that everybody keep talking about play caller. And there are people that are stuck in that, the fighter pilot, hot young guy that talks really well, that designs all of this stuff. And I'm going to tell you somebody, Brendan Staley, you just better be careful that that's not what you're getting, because there's a whole bunch more to games. And this is something that I like to break down. I like Canales, though, because I think he got the best out of Geno Smith and he got the best out of Baker Mayfield, two guys that have been forgotten. And Dan is very familiar with him. So this doesn't really apply to him as much, but it kind of does, is that we don't get to see guys cook. I'm looking at it from a Tampa, one of the teams you cover. I'm looking at it from their perspective. Oh, so now they got to go get another guy after only 1 year. It's just, it to me is just all of this reaching and grabbing to the point where people already say everybody running the same things in the NFL anyway. But I just think if there were 31 Kyle Shanahan's, that what people will do is try to clone them and everybody will look alike. And what they're doing is people are afraid to get their own identity and what they represent as a football club, because everybody wants to be like somebody else that they already see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a copycat league, right? That's what we always say. I mean, the first team to do the Wildcat, it was successful. Everybody else did the Wildcat. Look at the tush push. I mean, the tush push came out and everybody was against it. Next thing you know, you turn on every game every week and somebody new is doing the tush push. So if you're so against it, why are you out there doing it? And yeah, new and young head coaches and coaches getting their first runs and all that. Sean McVay, you probably say is the guy that really started that. Kyle Shanahan, perhaps is part of that as well. But everybody likes the new young, coach to come in. And you're right. And they want to get in on the ground floor. They want to get in before everybody else gets in. But I also look at this Dave Canales hire as really just evidence of where the Carolina Panthers are right now, because they had the whole situation with David Tepper and Frank Reich and all this craziness and the publicly coming out and saying, oh, I kind of like CJ Stroud over Bryce Young in the draft anyway. And just this kind of dumpster fire of an ownership situation. And I think it's really important for David Tepper And I hope that this is a sign that he's kind of humbled himself and allowed general manager Dan Morgan go out and get a guy that he knows, he's comfortable with, familiar with, and I would assume anyway has some trust in, and that this is a sign that maybe David Tepper is going to give his new brain trust some time, right? Like, this isn't going to be a 1-year turnaround for the Carolina Panthers. They don't have the bones that the Houston Texans had when they brought in CJ Stroud. The Carolina Panthers still need an upgraded line. They need a true number 1 running back. They need a number 1, number 2, maybe even a number 3 receiver. Their defense has a few pieces, but not a whole lot of pieces. I mean, so the Carolina Panthers certainly have some work to do. So hopefully Dave Canales, being a young coach, is going to get that opportunity, because if this is a 10 or 11 and done for Dave, that's not going to be a very good first exposure to being a head coach in the NFL. But it just shows you have a guy who's super hungry in Dave Canales. He's been in the league for a little while, but he really, 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 really just wants that head coaching job. Carolina was never going to attract a coach that had options. You know what I mean? And I'm a big fan of what Dave Canales did in Tampa. You mentioned I covered the Buccaneers, and I'm a big fan of what he did in Tampa, what he did with that offense, what he did with Baker Mayfield, how we watched his offense evolve during the season. He's not one of these coaches that's just, here's how I do it, everybody else needs to figure out how to get it done. He's willing to adjust. He's willing to shift. I thought that was really impressive, especially for a young coach. And he's very charismatic. He knows how to talk to the media. The fans are going to love him. He looks the part and all those things. So I wish him nothing but the best. Wig, I got to be in Detroit. Unfortunately, it was the game that the Buccaneers season ended on. But I talked to a lot of players in the locker room afterwards about the potential of Dave Canales leaving. And, every single man said he's going to be a great head coach. He's a great guy for the players. He's a great guy for the locker room. They selfishly wanted him back in Tampa. I selfishly wanted him back in Tampa because I want to cover the guy. But very happy for him, very happy for what he's going to do. Another guy, Wig, that I would really love to cover personally and see back in a team that I cover again, Raheem Morris, former head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He got some interim work with the Atlanta Falcons. It has been over a decade, Wig, since he led the Bucs for 3 seasons, had a double-digit win year, 1 year. Very young coach coming back to the NFC South, now back with the Atlanta Falcons. That news, not officially official at the time of this signing, but the Rappaports, the Schefters of the world saying it is going to happen. What do you think of Raheem Morris going to Atlanta?
I like him. I think he's one of the best communicators and talkers of the game that we've seen. And I also like the fact that he's been on both sides of the ball, right? Mm-hmm. And he went out and did a really, really good job out in LA when he was out there. People raved about him. So I just hope that he is in much of a lockstep, if you will, I guess what they call it, when you're locked at the elbows and joined together with the GM Terry Fontenot, as I believe Canales will be with Dan Morgan. Because more and more what we're starting to see, and we're seeing it here in Jacksonville, I don't know if you've been paying attention to what's going on down here. It's a clown show, right? But we're seeing now that there should never, ever be a question of, even if it's not true, there should never be a question of whether the GM and the coach are on the same page. So the one thing Carolina has done here today is they got 2 guys that know each other very, very well. And I think that complimentary GM coach is just as much important as complimentary offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Like, if you're aggressive on one side, you got to be aggressive on the other, right? So I hope that Terry Fontenot and Raheem Morris are on the same page in that, because you can't tell me that Arthur Smith didn't coach like he didn't want Bijan Robinson.
Right.
You can't tell me that he didn't coach like he didn't want Kyle Pitts. It's almost like, I'm going to thumb my nose at you because he didn't use them. You know what I mean? So that means to me that somebody was out of step with somebody else, right? So I just hope for their sake that they get that right, because to me that's an unspoken of, if that's a term, thing that has to happen in organizations, or you get a team like Jacksonville where it seems like one guy's yinging, the other guy's yanging. I
mean, you're 100% right, Wig. And I think it is an under discussed factor of it. I mean, you look at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, look at Vita Vea alone. Vita Vea was almost a lost defensive tackle in Mike Smith's even front defense. And then as soon as they bring in Todd Bowles' odd front defense and they make Vita Vea a nose tackle, he's suddenly one of the best players in the National Football League. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely matters. It makes a difference. And yeah, I mean, seeing Arthur Smith go from almost overusing Derrick Henry to underusing criminally Bijan Robinson just doesn't make any sense. And like you said, points to maybe somebody didn't want somebody there. And well, one of those guys is gone. The other one's got a new head coach. And I'm pretty sure Raheem Morris is going to be pretty excited to use Bijan Robinson as much as possible. So new day coming for the NFC South. They got 2 new head coaches. We'll see what happens with the rest of the teams in the NFC South. But first, we got to turn our eyes to the rest of the league. 2 jobs open now in the NFL, a bunch of qualified candidates still out there that need jobs. Wig and I are going to tell you who we think fits in each one of those openings coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This next segment is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off of our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you. So it's important that you let it out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to say how I really feel about something that you might even be thinking. I'm going to tell you how I really feel about mock draft reactions. Here we are. We're in the earliest stages of draft preparation. The first big scouting event, the Senior Bowl, hasn't even happened yet. And I already go into creating mock NFL drafts every week with the thought in mind that I'm going to need to ignore the comments while the professionals who build teams are constantly evaluating, reevaluating, ordering, and reordering their draft boards. There are those out there who already know key prospects and how their careers are going to unfold. But most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team, and it's important to get things off your chest every once in a while when they're bothering you. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. So visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Today's episode also brought to you by FanDuel. The NFL playoffs are progressing. We've got AFC, NFC Championship games coming up this weekend, but there is still time for you to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers to FanDuel get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, once you create your account and make that one $5 bet. The Ravens are 3.5-point favorites over the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC Championship game, and the San Francisco 49ers are 7-point favorites against the Detroit Lions in the NFC Championship game. This app is so easy to use. You can bet on any of those games or anything else, including live same-game parlays. You can find new bets in the Explore tab or make your own parlays in the Parlay Hub. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thanks again for making Locked On NFL your first listener, your first view today and every day, everydayers. Thanks again for coming through here. Come back on Monday. Kevin Ostreicher of Locked On Ravens will be here to talk about all of the championship weekend action happening. And he's going to have a front row seat because the Baltimore Ravens are hosting the AFC Championship game this weekend. Locked On has also launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Tony Wiggins, David Harrison back here with you, and we're going to continue today's episode talking about the open jobs rather, that remain. Wig, and we're going to try to match some candidates here. So, of course, we started. I mean, it felt like there was just a plethora. I like that word. There's tons of jobs open, tons of good candidates. You're like, man, everybody's getting jobs. But now all of a sudden, we got a very limited amount of space open and a lot of good candidates. But the Carolina Panthers have signed Dave Canales. The Las Vegas Raiders has stayed with Antonio Pierce. Thank goodness they finally made a good decision there. The Los Angeles Chargers are bringing in Jim Harbaugh. The New England Patriots have Jared Mayo. The Tennessee Titans bring in Brian Callahan. The Washington Commanders still have an opening. Or the Atlanta Falcons have Raheem Morris. The Commanders and the Seahawks now are the only 2 teams left with openings as we enter this weekend. And Wig, of course, who knows? There's rumors out there that Andy Reid may retire at the end of the season, so maybe there's a job coming open. But for now, this is it. When you look at these candidates, what's really interesting to me is they only cross 2 candidates. The Seattle Seahawks they've interviewed numerous amounts of people, but the highlight guys that they've interviewed: Detroit Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, Mike Kafka from the New York Giants, Dan Quinn, the Cowboys DC, Bobby Sloak, the Houston Texans offensive coordinator, and Frank Smith, the Dolphins offensive coordinator. The Commanders have also interviewed Ben Johnson. They've also interviewed Dan Quinn, also Eric Bieniemy internally, Aaron Glenn, the DC in Detroit, Mike McDonald, the DC in Baltimore, Bobby Sloak as well. I didn't highlight that, but that's another one that should be highlighted. And Anthony Weaver, who's an assistant head coach, D-line coach in Baltimore as well. So when you look at these candidates, Wig, and you think about these jobs, let's start with Seattle. Who do you think best fits that situation there moving forward? Dan Quinn. I mean, if they want to keep things going the way that they were already going, he's a long time. He understands the flow. He understands, and they already know what he is. Unless they want to totally change and go in a different direction.
with Washington, I really like Aaron Glenn. I really think they need to go with some new blood and try to infuse something new into the organization. I tell you what, it seems like everybody's out on though. Everybody's out on the mega personality guy, and what I mean is the dude that comes into a room and is kind of the alpha in the room, not just with his presence but with his voice. I'm shocked that Belichick didn't get picked up by somebody. And I know it's an age thing, and I know it may be I don't want to be going through this process again in 3 years because he might not, he might not want to go that long. But the Vrabel situation. Now, me and Tyler Rowland, who hosts Locked On Titans, we disagree on Mike Vrabel. He says that Vrabel would be a terrible defensive coordinator, but he's a leader of men. I think being a leader of men makes you a really good coordinator because you're only doing half the team. You know what I mean? So I'm not as surprised that he's not getting a look as a head coach because there's a lot that comes with him. And everybody isn't ready for that guy that's going to talk to people a certain way. Everybody isn't ready for that. I saw today where someone, I think it was John Leddy, who's covered, the Bucks too. They said something about Canales. He said he has a soft voice. I really do think that that's what a lot of these people are looking for in their organization. I never would have thought that two guys that have been to the playoffs that much and one guy who has so many Super Bowl rings, he can't get them all on one hand, would actually hit the market and people wouldn't just slobber all over Bill Belichick. I just don't get it. But I think if he interviews anything, and when's the last time Bill Belichick did a job interview? Think about it. And if he interviews like he does interviews, or if he interviews the way he does pressers, that's not very impressive, man. You just, it ain't a situation where you're just going to walk in and slap your rings on the table and say, I ain't interviewing nothing. That's what I am right there. It doesn't work these days. These days, it takes something else. And all of these teams are reaching out and they're trying to get it. So I would think that Vrabel, when people talk about Vrabel, they talk like he's 60. When they say, like Tyler says, you need to bring him into the modern age. He's 48 years old, dude. Right. Dan Campbell might be older than Mike Vrabel. He might be. I don't know how old Dan Campbell is. But so the thing is he's a young guy that people look at was kind of trained in the old way of doing things. People are mad at Mike Tomlin right now because they think it's the old way of doing things. Folks better be very careful that there's not one or two guys doing it the old way and they're beating the hell out of everybody else. Nick Saban said this after the semifinal game when he lost to Michigan. You know what he said they did? They huddled. Because now Alabama doesn't know what to do because their players are used to teams that don't huddle, and then everybody's standing there and turning around and looking at the coach for the plays. Well, those guys huddled up and they did it their old way. They came out and there wasn't no reason to turn around and look. You better look ahead in front of you because somebody's going to pop you in the mouth. So sometimes doing things the old way when everyone else has done things the new or doing things the new way, sometimes it works in your favor. And I want to look,
there's an ebb and flow to everything, right? And things repeat themselves. And, we're in a passing league and linebackers are getting smaller. Defensive linemen are getting smaller. And eventually someone out there is going to bring this road grading run game offense and get the right personnel and just be able to push dudes down the field. And everybody's going to want to now get the next sexy running back, and that position will have a revival. But, I think when you look at these matchups, Wig, I like what you said about the Seattle Seahawks and Dan Quinn. I really looked at the Seattle Seahawks specifically and the Los Angeles Chargers. When you looked out there and said, who's a right fit for Bill Belichick? I know the Atlanta Falcons were an early topic or early fit for him, but I really felt like the Seahawks and the Chargers were two organizations that were looking for new coaches, but they were looking for new coaches to help them win more than they are right now. This wasn't a rebuild. There was no interest in stepping backwards. They wanted a new coach that was going to step them forward. And I really felt like either of those guys. Now, Jim Harbaugh, obviously, a quote-unquote retread coach, goes to the Chargers. The Atlanta Falcons, they go, I think, the right direction and kind of, I don't want to say reset, but almost kind of take a rebuild approach to it. So we'll see what the Seahawks do, because I think Dan Quinn is interesting there. But when you look at the Washington Commanders, I mean, outside of Dan Quinn, you're talking all dudes who this would be their first head coaching job. Like, there's no other quote-unquote retreads. Dan Quinn is really the outsider there, and Ben Johnson is the favorite here in D.C. to land that job. We'll see what happens once he is fully available to take that job. Wig, I mean, we're going to be at the Senior Bowl next week, and I could be trying to react to news on Monday if the Detroit Lions get knocked out of the playoffs that the team that I cover is hiring a new head coach. I'm going to be in Alabama, so hopefully they don't do the press conference without me. But if they do, that's part of the job. We got to travel. We got to do what we got to do. Speaking of traveling, the Detroit Lions and that coach, Ben Johnson, are headed to San Francisco this weekend. Wig and I are going to tell you, is Ben Johnson playing in the Super Bowl or coaching in the Super Bowl, or will he possibly be available to take that job in Washington? That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. They're the easiest and the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you simply pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and then sit back, watch the game, watch your winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the most fun I've had, making up to 25 times my money this football season. And with the NBA season now here, you can pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, which is a league created specifically for combo projections. For example, you could take LeBron James and you could take Travis Kelce for 10.5 combined three-pointers and receptions in a single matchup. Go to theprizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that promo code LockedOnNFL, all lowercase, at prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL to get a $100 deposit match. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. Wrapping up the week here at Locked On NFL, and it's championship round, AFC Championship game, NFC Championship game, Wig happening. 4 teams remain in the NFL playoffs. 2 of them are going to the Super Bowl. 2 of them are going home with the rest of us. Welcome. There's plenty of space. Make yourself comfortable. And of course, we got to start with the AFC Championship game. It starts 3 p.m. Eastern time on CBS. I think it's also on Peacock or Peacock Plus, whatever they have, or whatever their streaming service is. Not Peacock, but whatever it is. Kansas City Chiefs, the Baltimore Ravens. Wig, the Baltimore Ravens are 3.5-point favorites, according to our buddies over at FanDuel. What is the key here to this game for the Kansas City Chiefs more specifically? And then who do you think is coming out of this game?
All right, so I'll go the second question first. Baltimore's going to win because there are a lot of teams. There are a lot of teams, maybe with the exception of Cincinnati and Baltimore, that would actually shake because it's like, okay, the king is here. When the champions from Kansas City come in and Mahomes and Andy Reid, Cincinnati don't give a damn about them, and you know who else doesn't? The Ravens. And you know why? Because they didn't give a damn about New England. Remember? They marched right through New England, right in the middle of a dynasty, and won a Super Bowl. And then they played them tough a couple of other times and had a couple of situations where guys dropped balls. In fact, I want to say the year before they won it, they should have beat them. And a guy dropped the ball in the end zone. I think his name was one of the receivers that played at Wisconsin. Dropped the ball. Joe Flacco hit him right in the chest. They would have won the game. So the next year, Baltimore says, okay, we're going to take our revenge, and they run right through to the playoffs. So to the Super Bowl. So they don't care. They don't care. A lot of people try to be the Ravens, and we want to play defense like Baltimore. They did it here in Jacksonville. But if you ain't built like them, if you don't have Baltimore stuff in you, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. It just doesn't work. And you can try to emulate them, but you can't duplicate it. And they have exactly what it takes to win this game, and I think they're going to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, there are times where we compare this game to combat, right? And you and I are both veterans, so we talk about this quite often. But, I think it's a good comparison. You know what I mean? And sometimes some people get offended by it or whatever, but I think it's a good comparison. It's a combat sport. Like this is a combat sport. This is one grown man or 11 grown men trying to tell 11 other grown men, I'm going to do what I want to do. You're not going to get to do what you get to do. But we do have teams on occasion that come out and they almost handle it like it's a chess match. And I'm not trying to down talk chess. It's a game of strategy. You want to beat your opponent and all that stuff, but it's not a combat sport the way that this one is. But usually when you see teams have a good run of success, more than just a year of playing well, they have that mentality. So when you talk about hiring head coaches and GMs, you talk about culture. That's what you're talking about, is having that mentality of, we don't care who you are. We don't care what your record is, what your record's been, how many rings you got. Our job is to come out here and to kick your butt and do what we want to do against you, no matter what. And the Baltimore Ravens, when you talk about play like a Raven, that's one of the things they have inside their organization. That's what that means, is come out every single game like you are the bully. So they're favored by 3.5 points, but it doesn't matter if they were 3.5 point underdogs. The Baltimore Ravens always come out like they're the bully. The Kansas City Chiefs, we've seen them do that. But this year's Kansas City Chiefs really aren't like that, Wig. Like, they're really not the bullies anymore, or that we've seen from time to time. And there's been a couple of years where they are the bully, and then a couple of years where they're not the bully. That's a team that they almost kind of remind me of Ray Allen. They really got to get hot. They got to hit a couple of shots and really get rolling before they start to take over. So it's not so much that they beat you up, it's that they run away from you. They're not going to run away from this Baltimore Ravens team. Mike McDonald has done a number on a lot of really good offenses this year. And he's kind of taken his victory lap, his tour this postseason as well. I think he's going to do a really good number on the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't know why Mike McDonald is not a sexier head coaching candidate. Well, I know why, is because it's an obsession with offensive-minded head coaches. But Mike McDonald, whether it's this year or somewhere else or another year, he is going to be a really good head coach someday in the National Football League. So, yeah, we both got the Ravens coming out of the AFC. Now, who are they going to face? We got the Detroit Lions in the NFC Championship game, 6:30 p.m. Eastern time on Fox. They are 7-point underdogs against the San Francisco 49ers. It's in San Francisco. So, Wig, I'll ask you the same question. Who's come out on top of this one, and who's going to the Super Bowl to face the Ravens?
This is hard, man. When you hit me up early and said what we were going to talk about, I knew it was going to come to this. Mm-hmm. I'm going with Detroit. I don't think I just think when you go into these games, you need to be extremely, extremely healthy. And I just don't see them winning without Deebo Samuel. And I really, really do believe that the combination of Dan Campbell, that attitude, whether the weather's bad. Detroit is the kind of team that carries, they don't care about the weather. The way that they play, we're going to see, we already saw, I think Baltimore, I'm going to give Baltimore a little credit here, because remember everybody was talking about how much of a bully San Francisco was, and Baltimore went out there and said, okay, let me go show y'all what a bully really is, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think a little bit of mystique came off. So now a team like Detroit that wants to bully people, I think they're going to go in there and say, well, somebody already did the heavy lifting for us. They slapped them around. They took their mystique away. You know what I'm saying? It's like a new inmate came into the jail and said, okay, who's the king? And he walked up and he slapped the fire out of him. And now everybody's going, well, I can slap him too. I think that's what you're going to get a little bit of this weekend. A key matchup to me is Charvarius Ward versus Amon-Ra St. Brown. If he allows St. Brown to do Debo-like things and take that game over, I saw a couple of days ago, he caught a pass. They needed 10 yards. He was at the 8. He got 8 when he caught it, and he turned around and he bullied his way to the other 2. That's the kind of stuff that if they get away with that, they're going to win this game, and I think they are.
You know, Wig, I'm glad you're taking the Lions, because so am I. I'm taking the Lions in this one, and it kind of goes back to the same mentality, right? One of these teams is a street fighter. One of these teams is a businessman, right? You got the San Francisco 49ers kind of buttoned up, suit and tie almost like, and just very business-like. They're very precise. Don't get me wrong. They're very good at the business that they do, but they're in the business of kind of fooling you, tricking you, getting ahead, and then running away from you. The Detroit Lions are in the business of making sure that we keep this in close quarters, and they are going to take you to the mat, and they're going to bite some kneecaps. You know what I mean? And you mentioned Louis Riddick earlier. Hey, shout out to a lot of people were laughing at Dan Campbell. I was one of them. Not
Me
like
too. I laughed at him.
Personally, I wasn't laughing at Dan.
Showing up at a press conference acting like weird. That's weird, but that's okay. Weird sometimes works.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, look, so Louis Riddick, 100% true, but you know what? We're all hungry for it. And the thing about this is Ben Johnson, again, talked about him being the favorite for the Washington job whenever his season comes to an end. And he did some things against Tampa Bay Buccaneers, kind of flex his offensive coordinator muscles a little bit. And he's going to be able to do some things. The San Francisco 49ers defense, look, there's a reason they went out and tried to make some trades midseason to bring some pieces in, because they kind of knew, and they were trying to kind of keep it quiet, but they kind of knew they needed some help. They needed some extra juice. It's worked to a certain extent, but this defense isn't as great as it has been. You go back to when they went to the Super Bowl against Kansas City Chiefs, wasn't as good as that one. It's not as good as that one was. And obviously, you know, that offense wasn't as great. And then, like you said, Deebo Samuel is a big part of that. So we'll see. Christian McCaffrey's got a little bit of bully in him. Brandon Ayuk kind of wants to be a bully. Brock Purdy is all business. But the Detroit Lions are going to come in looking to crack some skulls, and you know, people would love nothing more for Eminem to take over the championship weekend than Taylor Swift. So Absolutely. Detroit Lions, Baltimore Ravens in the Super Bowl. Wig, Mike McDonald, Ravens defensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, Lions offense coordinator. Those are my top 2 candidates for the Washington Commanders head coaching job. So that's a dream for me. I want to see that, man. And you know what? I want Josh Harris to show up to the Super Bowl with a contract with each man's name on it. So you know what? Whoever wins, as soon as you step off that podium, I got a contract for you. That's how I want that to go down.
That's a good idea, man. That's a good idea to go in there and say it's all or nothing. Whichever one of y'all wins this game, gonna get this job. Ooh, I like it. I like it, David.
I would absolutely love it. What else you're gonna love? Locked on NFL Monday with Kevin Ostreicher, Locked on Ravens. He's gonna be back to talk about all the action from the championship weekend and everything else going on in the NFL. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you got the notifications, the auto downloads turned on for your second listen of the day. Check out Locked on Jags, Locked on Commanders, or stay right here and go over to Locked on Sports Today, the first ever 24/7 sports streaming channel on YouTube. As always, thank you for making Locked on NFL your first listener, your first view today and every day. Every dayers, thanks for coming through every day like you do. For Tony Wiggins, I'm David Harrison. We'll see you right back here next Friday for another episode of Locked on NFL, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.